Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. When you picture Buddhism, you probably imagine, serene monks, peaceful meditation, and mindfulness.
Right. That's definitely the standard view.
But today, we are completely shattering that stereotype. We're
Literally.
exploring Naraka, which are the elaborate, gruesome, and honestly deeply fascinating Buddhist hell realms.
Oh, they are incredibly intense.
I mean, from ancient texts detailing rivers of lie, to physical hell theme parks, to epic tales of monks rescuing their mothers from damnation, we're unpacking why these realms exist and why the West is just so surprised by them.
it's a huge blind spot, yeah.
Exactly. We've got an incredible deep dive lined up for you today, but before we get started, if you like my channel, please subscribe and press the like button. Okay, let's unpack this, because going from the Western perception of mindful breathing to rivers of boiling lie is, well, it's a massive leap. We really need to understand the mechanics of where these visceral ideas actually come from.
It is a staggering contrast, especially for anyone whose exposure to Buddhism is just limited to meditation apps and, serene statues in a garden.
Right, totally.
To find the origins of this cosmology, we actually have to look at the Pali Canon. That's essentially the foundational collection of Buddhist teachings. And specifically, there's a text called the Devadatta Sutra.
Okay, the Devadatta Sutra, what exactly happens in it?
Well, in it, the Buddha details the fate of an unrighteous man who, upon death, is dragged before Yama. Now, Yama is the king of hell. But the thing is, Yama isn't some demon with a pitchfork. He operates a lot more like a cosmic auditor.
A cosmic auditor. Okay, I love that. So how does that audit actually play out?
So Yama interrogates the man, and he asks a very specific series of questions. He says, "Did you not see the divine messengers among human beings?" And these messengers, they aren't, angels in the sky with trumpets.
Mm-hmm.
They're the unavoidable realities of biology. A newborn baby, an old person frail with age, a sick person suffering, and finally, a corpse. Yeah, Yama is essentially asking, did you witness the absolute fragility of life and somehow still fail to realize that you are subject to rebirth? That your actions carry unavoidable mathematical weight?
Wait, I have to interrupt there. Yama is blaming him for not noticing sick people. That feels incredibly unfair.
How so?
Well, I mean, how is a normal person supposed to connect the mundane reality of someone getting sick with, I'm going to be boiled in a river of lie?
Right, I get that. But that is the crucial shift in perspective required here. See, Yama isn't a wrathful deity handing down a personal judgment just because he's offended.
Okay.
He is simply pointing out the fundamental law of physics in this universe, which is karma. The divine messengers are constant, everyday reminders that our reality is impermanent.
So it's about paying attention.
Exactly. If you ignore impermanence, you tend to cling to worldly things, you act selfishly, and you naturally accumulate bad karma.
Yeah.
The man ignored the physics of his own reality. So the text describes his ensuing torment in agonizing detail. We're talking running frantically through a dense forest, but instead of leaves, the trees are covered in razor blades that systematically slice off your fingers and toes one by one.
Oh, man, that is brutal.
Yeah, and it goes on to describe him wading through boiling lye and having molten metal poured directly into his mouth.
It is incredibly gruesome. But here's the mechanism I want to make sure I understand. In this cosmology, this isn't eternal damnation, right?
No, not at all.
Right, so instead of a permanent torture chamber, this sounds more like a brutal cosmic car wash. Like you go in absolutely covered in the dirt of bad karma, and these torments literally burn it off you until you're clean.
Yes. What's fascinating here is how that car wash mechanism fundamentally separates Naraka from the Christian concept of eternal hell.
Right, because in Christianity, it's forever.
Exactly. In Christian theology, hell is generally a permanent, final destination. It's a total separation from God. But in Buddhism, Naraka is just one of 6 realms of existence, and it is strictly temporary.
I mean, temporary in a cosmic sense, though, right?
Well, yeah. You might be enduring these torments for hundreds of thousands or even millions of years. But the mathematical equation of karma demands that eventually the debt is paid.
The math has to balance out.
Precisely. The bad karma is exhausted by the suffering, and the being is reborn into a different, hopefully higher realm. So the punishment serves a highly specific functional purpose. It resets the ledger.
That makes a lot of sense.
In fact, many later traditions view Yama not as an evil warden at all, but as an emanation of a Buddha or Bodhisattva, acting out of this terrifying, brutal kind of compassion to help beings clear a karmic debt They
Yeah.
couldn't clear themselves.
Wow, that completely reframes it. It's an impersonal cosmic system, and Yama is basically just helping you balance your books, even if it requires millennia of sheer agony.
A painful account.
Seriously. Which leads to a logical next step, I think. If karma is this mathematically precise cosmic physics equation, then the places where you burn off that bad debt must be equally structured. Like the cosmos wouldn't just throw you into a random fire. It would have a specific mechanism for your specific debt.
Precisely. And Buddhist scholars meticulously mapped that structure out. If you look at the Abhidharmakosha, yeah, it's an incredibly influential text from the 4th century CE. When you read it, you see a masterclass in cosmological architecture. It categorizes the underworld into 8 primary cold hells, 8 primary hot hells, and then this vast network of neighboring hells designed for hyper-specific karmic infractions.
And the torments act as karmic mirrors for your earthly crimes, right? I was actually reading about the Blue Lotus hell.
Oh, that one is vivid.
It really is. The temperature drops so low that the sufferer develops these massive frostbite blisters, and then the fluid inside the blisters freezes and expands until the skin literally bursts open, making the person look like they're covered in blooming blue lotus flowers. It's aesthetically beautiful in the most horrifying way possible.
It truly is.
Yeah.
And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have the black line hell.
Oh, what happens in that one?
This is specifically for individuals who harmed others or sowed division in their lives. So black grid lines spontaneously appear all over the sufferer's body.
Wait, like a grid pattern?
Yeah, exactly like a grid. Then hell workers use fiery axes and saws to slice the individual perfectly along those black lines.
Good Lord.
And here is the truly terrifying part. Once they are entirely chopped into pieces, a karmic wind blows across the remains, the person spontaneously reforms, and the entire process just starts over again.
It's like Sisyphus pushing the boulder up the hill, but the boulder is your own body being systematically dismantled just to reset the clock.
Exactly, it's relentless.
What blows my mind is that these vivid architectural details didn't just stay trapped in ancient manuscripts. Buddhists actually translated them into physical reality. Like they built actual hell theme parks across Asia.
Yes, because of the spatial reality of these realms, they could be physically constructed as learning tools. In Vietnam, for example, you have the Am Phu Cave in the Marble Mountains.
Right, I've seen pictures of that.
It's a subterranean network filled with life-sized, incredibly graphic dioramas of hellish torment. And it culminates in a shrine where you can confess your misdeeds before ascending back up to the sunlight.
So it's very interactive.
Very much so. And in Singapore, the brothers who made their fortune inventing tiger balm.
Wait, really? Tiger balm?
Yep, the very same. They built Ha Par Villa, which is an entire outdoor park dedicated to these gruesome moral displays. And in Japan, at the Senkoji Temple in Osaka, visitors can actually fill out a questionnaire to calculate their karmic trajectory, and then they stick their head into a stone hole to supposedly hear the ambient screams of the damned.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me, looking at the psychology of this. If you walk into a cave and see a life-size diorama of someone being sliced into blocks along black lines, does that actually foster genuine spiritual growth, or is it just visceral fear-mongering to make sure people behave?
That is the exact tension religious historians study. You have to remember that high-minded Buddhist theology, the subtle mechanics of dependent origination and the accumulation of karmic merit, that can be overwhelmingly abstract for everyday people.
Right, it's very philosophical.
Exactly. So these parks aren't just some spiritual scared straight program. They are vital socio-religious infrastructure. They translate highly abstract metaphysics into visceral, unforgettable, community-level guidelines.
So it makes the philosophy tangible.
Exactly. They ensure that even the uneducated layperson intimately understands the very real stakes of their daily actions.
Okay, so if these theme parks are designed to teach you how to avoid this cosmic wash cycle, it begs a very human question. What happens if someone you love is already trapped in it?
That's a huge theme.
Because if hell is a physical space within this vast cosmology, it stands to reason that someone powerful enough could travel there, right?
That is exactly what happens. The spatial reality of hell allowed it to become the setting for epic hero journeys. And this concept of the hell traveler is arguably the primary vehicle through which Buddhism successfully integrated itself into entirely new cultures.
Really? How so?
Well, the most prominent example is the Ghost Festival, which is celebrated widely across East Asia. The core mechanic of the festival is that the living can actually intervene for the dead. By offering food, money, and merit to Buddhist monks, families can actively alleviate the suffering of their ancestors who are trapped in Naraka.
And the foundational myth of this festival is the story of Mulan, or Maudgalyayana in Sanskrit, right?
Yes, exactly.
He is this deeply devoted disciple of the Buddha who achieves such profound meditative mastery that he can literally travel through the different planes of existence. And he uses this incredible power specifically to search for his deceased mother.
Right. And he finds her reborn in one of the lowest hells, starving and enduring horrific torment. Her specific crime in her past life was that she stole donations intended for the monastic community, and she kept them for herself.
Yikes, bad karma.
Very bad. So Mulan is absolutely shattered by seeing his mother in this state. He tries to feed her, but the food literally turns to charcoal in her mouth because her karma is so heavy.
Wow, that's tragic.
It really is. Ultimately, he begs the Buddha for a solution, and the Buddha institutes the practice of making offerings to the monastic community to generate enough merit to free her. And today, monasteries still put on elaborate theatrical performances of this exact story.
And the families get involved, too.
Oh, absolutely. Families will literally bring photographs of their recently deceased loved ones to the performance, symbolically asking Mulan to rescue their relatives, too.
Hang on, wait a second. I'm looking at the strict doctrinal rules here, and this feels like a massive contradiction.
What do you mean?
Well, Buddhist monks are supposed to renounce worldly ties, right? They leave their homes, they shave their heads, they explicitly leave their families behind to break the cycle of attachment. So why is Mulan, this highly advanced monk, so completely obsessed with saving his mom?
That is a brilliant observation. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it touches on the absolute genius of religious adaptation. See, before Buddhism arrived in China around the 1st century CE, Chinese society was already deeply fundamentally structured around Confucianism.
Okay.
And the absolute bedrock of Confucianism is filial piety. That is the unshakable, lifelong duty and reverence you owe to your parents and your ancestors.
Oh, wow. So a foreign religion showing up and telling Chinese citizens to basically abandon their parents to go meditate in the woods, that would have been a complete non-starter. It would have been culturally offensive.
It would have been rejected outright. But by elevating a narrative where a devout Buddhist monk uses his hard-won enlightenment specifically to rescue his mother from eternal torment, Buddhists brilliantly bridged the gap.
That's incredibly smart.
Yeah, they essentially proved that Buddhist practice was the ultimate expression of Confucian filial piety. It's a masterclass in cultural synthesis.
That is fascinating. You adapt the hero's core motivation to perfectly fit the local societal values. And this hell traveler trope isn't just a Chinese phenomenon either, is it?
No, not at all. In Thailand, for instance, you have the story of Phra Malai. He's a monk who journeys to hell to observe the mechanics of karma firsthand. He actually returns with messages from the damned, begging their living relatives to make merit for them.
Oh, so he's like a cosmic messenger.
Exactly. And his story is so culturally embedded in Thailand that it is traditionally chanted at weddings and funerals.
And importantly, these travelers aren't just male monks. I was reading about Kshitigarbha.
Yes, a hugely important figure.
Originally depicted as a high-class Indian maiden, she discovers her mother is suffering in hell for mocking Buddhist teachings. So she journeys into Naraka, witnesses the incomprehensible scale of suffering, and is so deeply moved that she makes a cosmic vow to remain in hell forever to comfort and instruct the beings trapped there.
Right, and just to clarify for everyone listening, because of that ultimate sacrifice, she becomes a bodhisattva.
Which is an enlightened being, right?
Yes, an enlightened being who has the ticket out of suffering, but deliberately delays their own ultimate salvation out of profound compassion, choosing to stay behind and save others. Over time in East Asia, this figure transitioned into a male bodhisattva, but the core story of maternal rescue remains.
That's amazing. And this tradition of touring hell hasn't stopped, right? Like it continues right up to the present day.
Oh, absolutely. In Tibet, you have the Delog tradition. These are people who fall completely unconscious, effectively dying, tour the hell realms, and then return to their bodies to preach about what they saw.
Almost like a near-death experience.
Exactly like that. A 12th century woman named Nangsa Obum is a famous historical example. But there is even a modern American Buddhist Delog named Samuel Burchell's.
Wait, really? An American?
Yeah. He had his heart stopped during quintuple bypass surgery, experienced a terrifying tour of the hell realms, and came back to write a graphic novel about it.
That is wild. You know, if you're listening to this and thinking, this sounds exactly like Dante's Inferno or the near-death experience industry in the West, you're completely right. It taps into this deeply universal human anxiety about what happens the second the lights go out.
It really does. It's a very human fear.
But it also brings us to the elephant in the room. With all these vivid descriptions, the slicing leaves, the bursting blisters, the American graphic novels, how is this actually interpreted today? Do modern Buddhists believe these are real physical places with actual molten metal? Or are we just looking at elaborate metaphors for the psychological anguish we cause ourselves in this life?
Well, the answer is both, and it heavily depends on who you ask in their specific tradition. There are certainly contemporary modernizing Buddhist schools that interpret Naraka strictly as mental projections, psychological metaphors for the internal suffering generated by anger, greed, and ignorance.
Right, a more psychological approach.
Yes, but we cannot rewrite history. We cannot ignore the historical reality, nor the reality for millions of practitioners in Asia today that these are understood as very literal, very physical planes of existence within the cosmology.
And that literal interpretation, the violence, the gore, the strict mathematical punishment, is exactly what causes such intense cognitive dissonance in the West.
Oh, absolutely.
Because we have this culturally ingrained, monolithic stereotype of Buddhism as nothing but peace, love, mindfulness, and meditation cushions. Why are we so utterly blind to the slicing leaves and the black line hells? According to the sources we looked at, it comes down to a concept defined by the philosopher Edward Said called Orientalism.
Yes, Orientalism is key here. It's the Western academic and cultural framework that views the East as a monolithic other. It's essentially a way of representing Asia that serves the imagination and the political needs of the West, rather than reflecting the actual lived reality of the people there.
Okay, that makes sense.
Now, when we talk about this, we usually focus on negative Orientalism.
Right, which is portraying Eastern cultures as irrational, dangerous, or savage inversions of Western logic. A classic pop culture example is Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom.
Oh, the perfect example.
You have Harrison Ford as the hyper-rational scientific Western man, completely contrasted with the screaming, bloodthirsty, irrational madmen of the Eastern cult. It's a deeply harmful stereotype.
It is. But our blindness to Buddhist hell actually stems from the exact opposite phenomenon, positive Orientalism.
Positive Orientalism.
Yes. This occurs when the West romanticizes or idealizes Asian culture, usually as a tool to critique its own domestic grievances.
Okay, so it's not that Western scholars or the counterculture of the 1950s just happened to miss the texts about the boiling lie. They actively curated them out.
Precisely. They ignored them.
You look at the Beat generation in America, writers like Jack Kerouac with the Dharma Bums and poets like Allen Ginsberg, they looked at 1950s American culture and saw a strict, uptight, hyper-consumerist society that was heavily burdened by the looming threat of Christian eternal damnation.
And they absolutely despised that framework.
You really did. So they looked to Asia and basically decided they must have the antidote. They projected onto Buddhism this image of a perfectly gentle, freewheeling, hyper-compassionate escape from American strictness.
Right. If conservative Christian America was defined by the threat of hellfire, then in the minds of the Beat generation, this exotic Eastern religion had to be the exact opposite.
It had to fit the narrative.
Exactly. They stripped away the intricate cosmology, the rigid monastic rules, and the brutal mechanics of karma, because those elements didn't fit the countercultural weapon they were trying to build.
So what does this all mean? I think a listener might hear this and think, okay, negative Orientalism is obviously bad because no one wants to be portrayed as a bloodthirsty cultist. But isn't positive Orientalism just a massive compliment? If someone thinks you're completely peaceful and perfectly serene, what's the actual harm in that?
This raises an important question, and it's the core of why scholars push back against these stereotypes so hard. Positive Orientalism might be dressed up as a compliment, but it is ultimately a cage.
A cage. How so?
Because it focuses entirely on what the West needs the religion to be, completely overriding the agency and the reality of the people who actually practice it. By romantically sanitizing Buddhism, you strip away its immense internal diversity.
You've used the nuance.
You lose everything. You erase the brilliant cultural synthesis that happened in China. You ignore the highly sophisticated mathematical mechanics of karma that literally require a concept of hell to function. You essentially take real people and thousands of years of deeply complex religious infrastructure and flatten them into a one-dimensional mystical caricature just to serve as a convenient therapy tool for Westerners tired of their own culture.
Wow.
It's an absolute erasure of truth in favor of a comforting exotic fantasy.
That is incredibly poignant. We started today looking at a man getting his toes sliced off by razor leaves in the Devadatta Sutra, and we journeyed through the visceral, interactive hell caves of Vietnam. We saw how the brutal mechanics of karma seamlessly blended with Confucian family values to create the beautiful tradition of the Ghost Festival.
It's quite a journey.
It really is. And finally, we arrived at the realization that our perfectly peaceful stereotype of Buddhism is really just Western romanticization. Next time you see a serene Buddha statue or hear about mindfulness, remember that there is a vast, ancient, and complex cosmology behind it, one that includes temporary, terrifying hells designed out of a brutal kind of cosmic compassion.
And we've seen how effectively a romanticized stereotype can completely erase a foundational concept like Naraka from the
Good.
Western consciousness. It makes you wonder if we have the power to mentally sanitize an entire global religion just because we desperately wanted a peaceful alternative to our own culture. What other ancient traditions around the world have we fundamentally misunderstood simply because we only allow ourselves to see what we want to see?